What's up, guys? Welcome to the Deeper Bible Podcast. Brian sitting here with Lindsay today, and we're continuing our series in the book of Revelation. Last book of the Bible, super controversial, super exciting, also hard to know what to do with it. And Lindsay, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
I'm curious if through the first couple episodes, like, what's happened for you? Has your view of Revelation been shifted, challenged? What were you expecting?
I love what you and Destiny have been talking about. Kind of growing up, the biggest things that stuck out to me in the book of Revelation was, at least the thing that I remember from back in the day was like, don't be a lukewarm Christian. Like, be better than the Church of Laodicea. And so for a long, I just kind of took that from Revelation, and like that was it. Don't be lukewarm. But in the last few years,
You're not.
Okay, great.
As far as I can tell.
Hopefully not. But the last few years, like, there's got to be more. There's got to be a greater purpose why this book is in the Bible. It can't all just be fear-inducing, which that was my understanding for a really long time. And it's not. Like, there's so much hope in it. There's so much that makes you love Jesus and appreciate the whole story that the Bible is trying to tell. And it really is a great kind of, not end cap, because we're still going, but there's so much in this book.
Oh, yeah.
So listening to you and Destiny in your conversation, some of the things that I'm keeping in mind as I am, we're all going on this journey together and understanding Revelation is keeping in mind the history, the theology, and the literature. And being okay that this is meditation literature. We're not going to understand it in one pass. It's going to be something that we revisit, might struggle and wrestle with, so we revisit it again, and through conversations like this, have a greater understanding and love God more.
Yes.
Like that's the response, worship, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, St. Augustine in the 4th century wrote a classic called On Christian Teaching, De Doctrina Christiana, and in it, he's aware. Augustine lived in a day where there was systems of interpretation that had like multiple levels. And you're supposed to go through these levels, and it would produce all sorts of different interpretations. And so he was saying, how do you know if a reading of the Bible is good or not?
Yeah.
How can you tell if it's an up or down? And he basically says, if a certain reading or a certain interpretation furthers the love of God and the love of neighbor, it's a good interpretation.
That's.
It's not to say that there are not like factually wrong interpretations or better or worse, but it's to say like, look, just to what you said, if this helps me love God more, if this helps me love my neighbor more, and proviso, love as God defines it, love as, not as we prefer to define it, as God defines it, then it's a good interpretation.
Yes.
And I find that very freeing.
I love that, because there was a time when I did read the book of Revelation, and fear was the response. And I'm like,
totally.
Okay, that's not the God I know. We got to go back and try this again. And so I hope and pray that is the result of this conversation.
Yeah.
Like love for God, love for others.
Yeah.
Fear's not the last.
Yeah, although that's an amazing segue to our passage for today.
Okay.
Because for me, one of the things Revelation challenges me is it confronts my mental picture of Jesus. And because in today's passage, we're going to see like Megawatt Jesus, like the one before, if you get a glimpse of him, you will fall to the ground as though dead. That's the right response.
Yeah.
And so it's not cuddly Jesus.
Yes.
It is awesome Jesus.
Yes.
And so I think that there's, the Bible talks a lot about fear, and there's the appropriate fear of the Lord.
Yes.
But then there's the inappropriate sort of fear that is based in not knowing or doubting the character of someone else.
That one. Yeah.
And so it gives us a window into God's character to say, I'm not afraid of you, but I do have awe before you. And I think today's passages calibrates that attitude of our heart,
right,
in a deep way.
Right.
So shall we get into it?
Yeah. What are we reading today?
Revelation chapter 1, verses 9 through 20.
Okay. And we are reading which translation?
We are reading the NTFE, or the NTE. It's the New Testament for everyone.
Yep. I did notice it's not on the regular YouVersion Bible app yet. But I did find it on, if you want to download the app, the Bible Gateway app, they do
Okay.
have this translation. So just look up the NTFE
Yep.
on the Bible Gateway app. And there might be other avenues, but
Yep.
that's the one I found, and it's easy to download.
Awesome.
Okay, so we're Revelation 1, and we're starting in verse 9.
Yep.
Okay, ready for me to read?
Go.
Okay. I, John, your brother and your partner in the suffering, the kingdom, and the patient endurance in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus.
Yeah. So, a few things to notice.
Mhm.
First is how John describes himself. He calls himself first, I'm your brother.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I, the grand poopah, seer of all.
Yeah.
It's family language.
Yeah.
I'm your brother. I'm on par with you, actually. And then he calls himself a partner. I'm your fellow participant in suffering and in endurance. So there's like a crisis assumed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm not exempt. I'm your partner. I'm shoulder to shoulder with you
Mm-hmm.
in this hard thing. But he also says, I'm your partner in the kingdom. So it points to a horizon beyond the crisis of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So those designations of brother, partner, kingdom,
Mhm.
that's deepening for us our sense of how he sees himself. In the last episode, we mentioned Patmos. I've actually been there. It's in the Greek Isles in the Aegean Sea. Beautiful island. It's 8 miles long, 5 miles wide. Today, there's a couple towns, port town, but a lot of dirt roads, a lot of convents and nunneries and stuff like that. Many sites that commemorate the revelation, like you can actually go into the cave where that is remembered as the place where John received this, the grotto.
Okay.
I spent a week there on the island of Patmos when I was 22 and was in a pretty dark place in my life, actually. And this was when, after breaking my neck and dropping out of school and, my world was just totally coming undone. And when I went to Revelation, I didn't have like a Jesus revival. I was like reading Nietzsche and Homer and
Mm-hmm.
falling apart and really questioning God's existence.
Mhm.
Beyond that, I mean, just being like, wow, I live in a meaningless world. And I camped, I hiked to the far end of the island, and then at this curve, like where there's this big slope down to the bay, I just like bushwhacked down the slope and so went to this beach that's not a beach. It was just like a little rocky shoreline, pitched my tent there and stayed there for a week. And every day I would climb up to the top of the mountain because there was a bunch of nuns at a convent thing. And I'd come at the end of their Vespers prayer because they would give me free vegetables and bread.
Oh my gosh.
So I bummed free vegetables and bread. And I made friends with this one nun. She was I don't know, mid-40s. She was German. She was an attorney in Germany before she came to Jesus. And then she said, I'm going to go to Greece and become a nun. Very bright woman.
Okay.
Her name was Glyceria. And so my own story intersects with Patmos a little bit. And it's a beautiful place. I mean, it's the Greek islands are so dreamy. I mean, they're super, super beautiful.
It's on the bucket list. Yeah.
Yeah, you should do it. Well, actually,
I don't know the way you did it. I don't know if I will repeat that.
You mean a little tent
No.
with a little stove, man. And
it's a little too intense.
yeah, because then I think a couple times I had to hike all the way to the other side of the mountain to go to the grocery store, and because I wanted to get some jam,
Just food.
cookies,
Yeah.
coffee. Definitely need
Yeah.
my coffee. So yeah, I'm a total bum and cheapskate.
Oh my gosh.
But
Okay.
let me also say though, in a year, we're in spring of 26, March, we're taking a trip to Greece and Turkey,
Okay.
Israel, Greece and Turkey, and
Yeah.
we're going to go to a lot of the sites of Revelation,
That's very cool.
the early the churches to which he's writing, and
Okay.
so we'll see the Greek Isles and stuff. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Hope you can come.
Might have to do that one.
Maybe you and Dustin could join the fun.
That'd be
good.
very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay. Should we keep going?
Let's.
Okay. So we just wrapped up verse 9, starting in verse 10.
Yes.
I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. Write down what you see in a book, it said, and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea.
Perfect. John is Such a great writer. I love, so he says, I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. Where else in the Bible do we hear a loud trumpet? Well, this is how the whole encounter between God and Israel at Mount Sinai begins.
Right.
In Exodus 19, they finally get there, and Moses is like preparing the people. Okay, prepare yourselves, because when the trumpet blasts, that's when we're going to meet God.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read through 19, like it circles back to the trumpet thing multiple times, and it's like, and it got louder and louder and louder, such that at the beginning, the whole idea was all of Israel is going to meet with God. But after the trumpets just totally blasting and there's fire and smoke, the Israelites are like, Moses, could you go for us?
Yeah,
Could you?
Scary.
Yeah, this is terrifying. Would you do it, please? And so that's what happens.
Okay.
This is the famous transition from a nation of priests to a nation with priests. A nation, all of whom were to be mediators for the world, to a nation that needs its own mediators.
Mm-hmm.
And God tells Moses to write down, on the tablets and the Torah and all that. And just so, John is commanded, write down what you see in a book. And so there's all sorts of resonances with the prophetic tradition that begins with Moses.
Mm-hmm.
John stands squarely in that tradition. And these 7 churches, as we mentioned earlier, they stand in for, they represent all the churches. 7 is a symbolic number that, means wholeness and completion. We talked about that last time.
Mm-hmm.
These 7 cities, they're pretty big cities, actually. These were where the regional councils would meet. Something interesting, the early church, its strategy was pretty urban. Paul would just go to the big cities and kind of plant cells, and then knew that from there the social stream would take things downstream.
Mm-hmm.
And this anticipates a major theme in the book of Revelation, actually. By the end, it's kind of a tale of 2 cities. There's Babylon, which is the archetype of an evil, wicked, oppressive city. And there's the New Jerusalem, which is the archetype, well, it's not the archetype, it's reality of God's new creation. Mm-hmm. And this brings to a climax a theme throughout the Bible of the role of cities.
Yeah.
Because, in early Genesis, who founds the first city? Cain, after he murders his brother. And he names it after his son. He names it Enoch. But it's a self-aggrandizing move. I'm going to name this after me. Mm-hmm. And then it goes on, and the Lamech. Well, if you read through all these genealogies, like Nimrod is a guy he's a mighty hunter, but he founds like Nineveh and he founds Babylon, and he's a bad dude. And by the way, his name means rebel. And then there's the Tower of Babel, this great city where we're going to make a name for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And Abraham distinguishes himself because he says, I'm just going to go be a wanderer out in the hills. Mm-hmm. So early in the Bible, cities are often sort of labeled bad. Cities are bad. The pastoral life, the sheep and herds, that's the good life. And, Sodom and Gomorrah are blown up, these cities. Lot said, that's where I want to go live. That's where it's happening. But throughout the Bible, in the Old Testament, the exception is the city of Zion, the city of David, Jerusalem. But even that becomes corrupted. So anyways, the fact that John writes to these 7 cities, and then the book of Revelation itself is between these 2 poles of Babylon and New Jerusalem. And then at the end, it's the New Jerusalem that triumphs. It's actually, in many ways, a vindication of the city as not ultimately wicked, but actually as the site of God's ultimate redemption.
Okay. Creation
begins in a garden, and it goes to a city that has garden-like features. But anyways, we live in a big urban region. San Francisco's just down the road, Berkeley, Oakland. And so sometimes I'm very interested personally in the question of the theology of cities. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that, or shall we move on? I think there's
I think we can. So the idea. So this is a letter, and it's going to the main churches in these cities, and then from there, those churches, it would trickle down to the other smaller churches in the region.
I think that's the idea.
Okay.
And I think the idea is also, this is often what's called a circular letter.
Okay.
So the idea is, hey, we're going to send it geographically closest would I think probably be Smyrna. Mm-hmm. No, Ephesus actually. Smyrna's north. Smyrna is in modern day Izmir. Mm-hmm. Anyways, send it to Ephesus. Okay, you guys read it, spend a week with it, then pass it on to Smyrna, pass it on to Pergamum, then pass it on to Thyatira. And so it's a circular letter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay.
We are back in verse 12. Okay. So I turned to see the voice that was speaking with me. As I turned, I saw.
Yeah, ... We've cut it off right there.
Okay.
Why? Because this is something common in Revelation. It's subtle, but it's really important. John will hear one thing, like coming from behind him. He'll hear something, and then he'll turn and see something else, something surprising.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's something that I've noticed recently where, he'll, hear and then see. So he's hearing something, which, I don't know. When you hear, there's this thing that you're imagining in your head and this expectation of what it should be.
Right.
And then what he sees is very different.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd never caught on to that. That's only been in this round of reading through Revelation that I'm like seeing that.
Yeah.
Like what we expect and what actually happened.
The other night I had this experience. I was at home. I was got home from work, was eating dinner, and I looked and the oven's on, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's cookies in there.
Yeah.
And I thought Sarah made cookies. And I went to open the oven. I was so ready to see cookies. And I saw a pie.
Oh.
But I was like, I think I was like, oh. And Sarah's like, what? You don't like pie? And I was like, no. I was just expecting to see something else.
Yeah.
And so it's this moment that actually allows for an insight that you might not otherwise have had.
Yes.
John uses this. So for example, in chapter 5, he hears about a lion, the lion of the tribe of Judah. But he turns and what he sees is a lamb. And it's both. You know? Or famous in chapter 7, John hears the number 144,000. And then he gets these tribal lists, 12,000 from this tribe. No. But then he turns and he sees an uncountable multitude from every tribe under the. So like the Jehovah's Witnesses fix on this well, there's only 144,000 kind of thing. But they don't see the poetry of how, he heard 144,000, but what he actually sees is something immeasurably larger.
Like all the nations, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so just here, he hears a trumpet. I hear this voice like a trumpet, but now he's going to turn and he's going to see. He's going to see the trumpet. And what is it going to be? And that's the next several verses.
Okay.
So will you read this for us?
So I'm going to pick up. As I turned, I saw, ... 7 golden lampstands. And then verse 13, and in the middle of the lampstands, one like a son of man, wearing a full-length robe and with a golden belt across his chest. His head and his hair were white like wool, white like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like exquisite brass, refining in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. He was holding 7 stars in his right hand, and a sharp 2-edged sword was coming out of his mouth. The sight of him was like the sun, and when it shines with full power.
Yeah. I love this passage. And, it's worth pondering that this is the Jesus the early Christians worshipped.
Right.
The exalted, the risen, the enthroned one. I don't know if the early Christians were as interested in us in reconstructing the historical Jesus. And sort of, what was he like on the roads of Galilee? That's what he was, but this is who he is.
Yeah.
And this is who he was before he was incarnated.
Yeah.
And it's this very high vision of him. This whole description, by the way, anticipates the messages to the 7 churches. As John addresses each of the 7 churches, he's going to pull out certain details and thread those into the message. So he'll say the words of the one whose eyes are like a flame of fire and whose feet are like exquisite brass. The words of the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and so forth. So this becomes the template for the message to the churches.
This particular passage becomes the template?
Yep,
Okay, so we can keep going back to this?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. In chapters 2 and 3, John is pulling from that collection of descriptors. Yeah. And, this morning, as I was thinking about this, I was like, I'm going to throw this into ChatGPT and be like, draw me up somebody who looks like this. I want to see what that looks like. And I don't know if it's for copyright reasons or just it stumped it, but it's like, sorry, we can't do that. But the point,
I want to see it.
Yeah, I know. The point is it's like, Sarah and I often talk about we'll wake up and be like, dude, I had weird dreams.
Yes.
And we'll describe the dreams and it's like doesn't work spatially.
Yeah.
but that was an interesting dream.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, combining all of these things may not work, but it's more like a surrealist painting or
Yes.
something like that. It's a different medium. It's not appealing to logic. It's appealing to your imagination.
Right.
And it's important to see that. Be that as it may, there are a few important tells, a few important like things. We're like, oh, that's a key message he's telling us right there.
Okay.
Like, for example, 7 golden lampstands.
Right.
To somebody who's literate in Jewish culture,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, yeah, there's the 7, there's the candelabra in the
Right.
temple. And, that's Exodus 25.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be confused with the Chanukiah or the menorah,
Mm-hmm.
which is the commemorates the holiday of Hanukkah, and that has 9 branches.
Oh, I didn't realize it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So there's some Jewish things with 9.
Mm-hmm.
That's Hanukkah,
Okay.
and there's some with 7.
Got it. And that was
That's in the
the
temple.
lampstand in the
That's
temple.
right.
Got it.
That's right. And but wait, think about this. If the 7 churches are basically like a menorah in the temple,
Mm-hmm.
what is that saying? It seems to be suggesting that the Jesus movement is the true form of Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the letters to the 7 churches, he's like, well, there's that synagogue is attacking you, those so-called Jews and so forth. In many ways, the New Testament is part of an intra-Jewish debate
Mm-hmm.
about who are the legitimate heirs of the promises of the Hebrew Scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
And so describing the 7 churches as a candelabra is basically saying this is the continuation of true Judaism in a way.
Which we'll probably get to this later. But in power reading through Revelation, at the end, towards the end, there is no temple in the new creation.
Yeah.
So is this kind of saying like, okay, the church is taking the elements from the temple, visual elements from the temple, is he giving like, this is how they are going to be practiced in new creation now? Like the church is like the candle, the lampstand.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's a really interesting question.
I don't know either.
Well, one of the things that Revelation is forcing us to do, so the area of theology is called ecclesiology.
Okay.
And that comes from the word ecclesia,
Mm-hmm.
which is the Greek word for church or the assembly. The question is, what is the church? And is it this thing that we do on weekends with multi-site and planning center?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there some like deeper metaphysical
Mm-hmm.
existence of the church? And John has a very high view of the church. The church has an existential function in holding the world together. In fact, as we're going to see, maybe we can just mention it right now. Jesus is holding 7 stars in his right hand.
Right.
Now, in classical antiquity, there much was made of the 7 planets, the 7 classical planets. You can see them with the naked eye.
Mm-hmm.
The word planet comes from the Greek word planetes, which means wanderer, because unlike, they didn't have Galilean astronomy or whatever, but unlike the normal stars, which just move across the heavens every night, there were 7, including the sun and the moon, that had irregular paths. And we now know those are orbits in our solar system. But here's the point. Those 7 classical planets were seen as bound up with the destiny of the universe. Like people would consult them and they're seen as powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus holding those 7 stars, 7 planets in his hand, that is saying Jesus has commanding control of the destiny of the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's using language that you might just like, neat, 7 bright things in his hand.
Yeah.
But with the cultural background, you're like, no, it's saying something very profound about the control and the guidance that Jesus has over the course of history.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. There's the, so we've already identified a Jewish connection, sort of a pagan mythological, secular mythological direction. There's one other Old Testament thing that's really, really important, which is Daniel chapter 7.
Okay.
We talked about this last time. John is already tuned into this channel because he talks about, behold, you see the Son of Man coming on the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
That's Daniel 7.
Mm-hmm.
But also in Daniel 7, we meet the Ancient of Days, and his hair is white. His clothes are white. There's fire coming out of him.
Mm-hmm.
That's very much like what we're seeing here in Jesus. His hair is white, his hair is white like wool, white like snow. His eyes are like a flame of fire. And so what seems to be going on, this is an insight from N.T. Wright, which I think is brilliant. He says, when we look at Jesus, we are looking straight through him at the Father himself.
That's interesting.
And so it's like a merger.
Yeah.
Almost like I think it's a solar eclipse. It's like when the moon is perfectly aligned with the sun, and boom, you can see them both in alignment. And so it's a profound way of speaking about who Jesus is and what Jesus enables us to see right into the heart of God, right into the realm of heaven.
That's very cool.
It is very cool.
Very cool.
It is very cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
So verse 17 says, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though I was dead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty intense.
It is. Yeah. It's certainly something that, I'm a pastor. I deal with the things of God all the time. For those listening, I just did air quotes, the things of God.
Yeah.
But like, you could get sort of numb to the holy and treat it casually.
Yes.
And so something like this for me is always like a huge gut check. Like, do you know what you're dealing with?
Yeah.
Do you know? Yeah, I mean, yes. It's not at all about undermining the idea of having intimate, loving relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
But it is not. It's if you tame it to sort of a snuggly sort of relationship, you are like super misunderstanding what you're dealing with here.
Just like the analogy of the sun or fire. Even.
Yeah.
Like, it is great. It is warm. It is very nice.
Yeah.
But when you treat it small like that, you may forget its power and ability to completely obliterate you.
Yeah. I mean, how long can you stare at the sun directly before your eyes are permanently damaged?
Correct. Not very long.
I bet you if you stared straight at the sun for 10 seconds, you'd probably permanently damage your eyes.
Yeah.
And here he describes Jesus, the sight of him was like the sun when it shines with full power. And so, I mean, he's stunned. He's like, shocked. It reminds me in some ways of the Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus.
Right.
He sees Jesus and he's just, boom, he goes blind.
Yep.
And there's something, people sometimes are like, boy, I wish Jesus would show up more. I wish Jesus was present. It's like, maybe you can't handle the truth,
Yeah.
Like there's this one of my favorite stories is in Luke 24 on the road to Emmaus. Jesus is walking down the road with these two really disappointed disciples, and they're like, man, we're just heartbroken. And Jesus is walking. They don't recognize him. And it says, and beginning with Moses and the prophets and all the scriptures, Jesus explained to them the things about himself. And they have a meal. He breaks bread, and in the breaking of bread, they realize who he is, and at that moment, he disappears.
I love that.
Like, why did he disappear right then? It's because the type of seeing of Jesus is something that we can only handle in very small doses.
Right. Right.
And so it's out of love. It's not out of a sort of like, find Waldo now, I could give you more of me, but I don't want to.
Yeah,
it's
like the Wizard of Oz or something.
I mean, it really forces you to reckon with your own creaturehood.
Yes.
And your own smallness.
Yeah.
And so something especially for people, I think, who are in Christian work, need to take this passage to heart, because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so anyways, now, would you read the next bit? Because the next bit is interesting.
Okay. He touched me with his right hand. Period. Don't be afraid, he said.
Right. So in apocalyptic literature, one of the tropes, features that always shows up is what's called the refusal tradition.
Okay.
Where somebody, Daniel, Ezekiel, whatever, will be having these visions, and they'll have a heavenly guide that is so impressive and just boggling that they'll worship the angel. And the angel will always say, no, don't do that.
Me.
I'm a fellow servant with you. Worship God. Is a refusal tradition. Just like the prophets refused their task, the angels also refuse to be worshipped. Here, Jesus does not refuse. Jesus rightly acknowledges that he should be worshipped, that he should be fall before as though dead. And by the way, later in Revelation, there's two instances, I think in like chapters, I don't know, from 17 to the end, there's two instances where John worships an angel. And twice the angel says, don't do that. Stop. I am a fellow servant just like you. Like I'm on the creation side of the creator-creator distinction. And you only worship that which is on the creator side of that distinction. And so I just think that's interesting that Jesus accepts that worship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
He
Want
says,
to read the next little
don't
bit?
be afraid, he says. I am the first and the last. Verse 18, and the living one. I was dead, and look, I am alive forever and ever. I have the keys of death and Hades.
Yeah. So these are like Jesus's credentials. Why shouldn't you be afraid? Why do I have the authority here? Because I was dead and now I'm alive. And I have the keys of death and Hades. You know, the early Christians maybe focused more than we do on the resurrection of Jesus. And we focus a little more on the cross of Jesus. And I know that for myself growing up, I mean, Christianity in a nutshell, we're sinners, we deserve to die, but Jesus died in our place. But for the early Christians, yes, all that mattered. But the real clincher was that he rose again. And death is not the end. Decay, corruption, evil is not the end. New life and new justice and new beauty and new order, that's the end. And the church in Jerusalem that covers the place where Jesus actually died, it's not called the Church of the Holy Cross. It's called the Church of the Holy Grave, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And that very architectural orientation is theology. And it's theology that the Western church needs to hear again. I mean, Paul says very emphatically towards the end of his letter to First Corinthians, Jesus isn't raised. This whole thing is a joke, and we're a joke.
Right.
An interesting wrinkle here, as you know, being Christian in a modern, secular, postmodern world or whatever, is one of the critiques of Christians from postmoderns, and this is from Nietzsche going onward, is, you know, Nietzsche is often called like a nihilist. You believe in nothing. You but he turns his finger around and says, no, you're the real nihilists, you Christians, because you sacrifice this world for some ghostly, imaginary, non-existent other world. You are the ones who believe in nothing and are sacrificing this for a non-existent that.
Yeah.
And that claim would hold true if it weren't the fact that resurrection is real.
Yeah.
And that the kingdom and the realm of God is real.
Yeah.
And so, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, this is the whole idea, is to say, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Nietzsche's right about us.
Yeah.
And we really are out for lunch. But if Jesus did rise from the dead, then that fundamental fact has to reorient the whole world around it. And I'll stop there.
Okay. All right, let's keep going.
Sure.
Verse 19. Now write what you see, both the things that already are and also the things that are going to happen subsequently.
So there's two levels here.
Okay.
He's saying again, write two things. Things that are already happening and the things that will happen. So present and future. And Revelation's approach to reality, you could think about it like a parade going down the street and viewed from different angles. Like the little kid on the sidewalk who's chewing cotton candy, like watching the parade go by. Once the last float goes by, the parade's over for him. The parade's not fully over. It's still going, but it is for him.
Yeah.
For somebody who's actually in the parade, though, you're on a float.
Yeah.
You know, like you're in it the whole time, and it's not over till it's over. Now think about a news reporter in a helicopter way above, who the whole time they can see the beginning and the end. They can see its whole progression. The parade will be experienced very differently, whether you're the kid on the sidewalk, whether you're in a float, or whether you're above the whole thing in a helicopter. And the book of Revelation kind of goes back and forth. It adopts all these different perspectives in different ways. And so when Jesus says, write about the things that are and the things that are going to happen subsequently, he's saying, you know, the temporal perspective is multiple, not singular. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, this it's we've seen it a few times. So, right, the things you see, the things that are going to be.
Yes.
He is the God that was, God
Yes.
that is, the God that is to come.
That's
He's
right.
the Alpha, he's the Omega.
That's
so
right.
like there's a lot of,
Yep.
is this like a pattern that we keep seeing?
Right.
Like was, is to come.
Absolutely.
What was the other one? I am that I am. I think that was the other one I wrote down.
That's
Anyway.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep. And that's why this is at the end of the canon. It's self-consciously summing it all up.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's well placed in its ordering in the Bible.
I think that's also helpful. As we were talking about as we're reading this, keeping in mind history, theology, and literature, that rhythm is actually very helpful. And remembering like this was written to a certain group of people. We can read it now, and there's so much more to come. Like, I don't know, it's helpful, at least for me, to just keep reading with that in mind. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Verse 20, keep going.
Onward.
Keep trekking along.
Yep.
Okay, the secret meaning of the 7 stars, which you saw in my right hand, by the way, and the 7 gold lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches themselves. I wish there's as I read Revelation, like, can we have more of those descriptions, please? Like, what all this means.
Yeah, right. It's one of the few points, much of the book John expects to be self-interpreting.
Yes.
But this is standard apocalypse where the guide says, let me tell you what this means.
You're like, please tell me.
Exactly. Exactly. But think about what this means. So we already talked about how the 7 stars, if the 7 planets are in the background there, how sort of cosmic destiny is being invoked. But if the 7 stars are the 7 angels of the 7 churches, think about what that's saying again about the churches. The churches are linked up with the destiny of things. Like, this isn't just it is a very high view of the role of what it means to be a Christian. Like, for example, think about Romans chapter 8, where Paul talks about how, the whole creation groans waiting for the revealing of the sons of God. Because the idea is when humans go wrong, everything downstream from humans in God's created order suffers. But when humans are redeemed, everything downstream flourishes. So there's a connection between, and not in a hubristic sense, it's actually in a self-emptying sacrificial sense, but humans have an important role to play in God's order of things. And humans who are redeemed by the Son of Adam, who are the new humanity, according to the New Testament, are vital in whatever's going to transpire in the future of our species and the world.
Yeah.
And so by using this symbol language, he's saying a lot is at stake. And your choice whether to persevere or to go off the rails actually has there's a lot on the line with how you choose to direct your loyalties and your affections.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we can notice here is that, a lot of worldviews, ancient and modern, assume that, well, if there is a God, he's probably far away and doesn't super much care how we live, just kind of try to be nice, but God doesn't take a deep interest in what goes on down here, obviously, because there's so much bad stuff that happens. And if you did take an interest, bad stuff wouldn't happen, whatever. But what's going on here is saying the 7 stars of the angels of the church, the angels are watching over the churches. Here's the point. God cares about what's going on the earth. Yeah. He is a God who sees, who's involved, who is proactive in giving guidance and protection. And that's one of the comforting aspects of this book as well, where it's saying, okay, yes, there are beasts and there are terrifying things and there are, famines and wars. That's just a depressingly normal day in human history. But there's also a God who is watching out for you. There's also a God who is actually Alpha and Omega. And I think that's deeply comforting.
It is.
Yeah.
I think you and Destiny talked about kings and queens to rule. Like, God didn't just leave us without power, to participate and join with him in creating this great big world. Like, we are kings and queens through Jesus to to do good and to help bring out this new creation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's empowering. That's hopeful to know that he loves us so much and has given us the ability and the power to be an extension of himself. Am I saying that right? Can you help me?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think the only thing to sharpen up or just to be aware of is the way Jesus defines power.
Yes.
Is unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
There's this great scene in John 19 where Jesus is this great showdown between Jesus is standing before Pilate,
Mm-hmm.
who's the Pontius Pilate, who's the representative of Caesar.
Mm-hmm.
Pilate says, "So you're a king?" And Jesus
Mm-hmm.
says, "Well, you say so."
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "For this reason I was born, to bear witness to truth.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone who's of the truth listens to my voice."
Yep.
And so Miroslav Volf points this out. He says, Jesus does not refuse the title of king, but he changes its content.
Yes.
And then he allows Pilate to put him to death.
Yep.
Thereby outflanking Pilate.
Yeah.
Thereby, taking the final weapon of death out of the hands. I mean, at the end of the day, our legal code is like, look, if you're bad, we'll just kill you.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently that's supposed to have a deterrent effect.
Right.
But if you can actually outflank death, well then, wow, now the rules of the game have changed.
Yeah.
And so, yes, that royal priesthood is so key, but it's not triumphalistic.
Yes, I'm glad you clarified that.
It's not a sort of like bulldozer theology.
Yes.
It's actually, no, we follow the slain lamb.
Yes. Yeah. It's a sacrificial love.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here.
Mm-hmm.
What are some takeaways that we can walk away with today?
Yeah. Earlier we talked about the author, John, as Eugene Peterson says, he's a theologian. He takes God seriously. He's a poet. He takes words seriously. He's a pastor. He takes people seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to close with a pastoral reflection from Tom Wright, who, in addition to being a theologian and a poet, is actually also a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to read this. This is sort of his exhortation, and I think maybe it'll land with you.
Okay.
He writes, "Hold the picture in your mind, detail by detail, of the risen Jesus. Let those eyes of flame search you in and out. Imagine standing beside a huge waterfall, its noise like sustained thunder. And imagine that noise as a human voice echoing around the hills and round your head. And then imagine his hand reaching out to touch you. The Jesus in question here has as his credentials the fact that he was dead and is alive forever, like someone whispering to us that they know the secret way out of the dungeon where we have been imprisoned. He says, I've got the keys of death and Hades. I have them right here. There's nothing more you need to worry about. To grasp all this requires faith. To live by it will take courage, but it is that faith and that courage which this book is written to evoke. We're being asked to imagine what would it look like if the curtain between heaven and earth were suddenly pulled up, revealing the Jesus who had been there all along, but whom we had managed either to ignore or to cut down to our own size. This is the answer. A Jesus who is mind-blowing, dramatically powerful, but also gentle and caring. A Jesus in and through whom we see his Father, God the Creator. A Jesus who has spoken and still speaks words which explain what is going on in the present and warn of what will happen in the future. And so just to
It's great.
bring us back to the very first phrase of the book, revelation of Jesus Christ. This whole book is ultimately about Jesus. It is a revelation of Jesus. And so here at the very beginning, end of chapter 1, we get John gives us what he told us he's going to give us, a revelation of Jesus himself. And it's very important to keep that in mind as we go on into the symbolic territory of Revelation. This is ultimately about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And we each ultimately have to make a choice about him and his role in our life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so any thoughts? Where does this land for you, Lindsay? Like where does your heart and mind go?
Well, I'm excited to just keep going and to keep understanding. And I feel like especially this gives us kind of a good home base to keep kind of coming back to and be reminded, because things get crazy. There's lots of eyes and wings and, stuff that we're going to be reading about. And so I think creating this foundation, having a good home base is very, it's great. It is great. So I'm going to keep doing that as we keep trekking on. And also, I was talking to Destiny about this too. Sometimes reading Revelation in isolation or by yourself can get a little weird. So, so at least my encouragement is we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
Have conversations with people around you about it, and kind of just and kind of dissect it together. Feel free to reach out to us on the website or whatever, and if there's any questions you have or you feel like you're going off trail, we're here. We're here to be support and
absolutely
to dissect it together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good word.
All right.
Good word. Well, thanks for joining, guys. Hope it was helpful. Hope it was interesting. We're in the Bay Area, California. We're out of a church called the Bay Church, and we'd love to see you sometime in person, online, thebay.church. Also, if the Spirit moves you, we need some financial support, honestly, to keep this ship sailing. And so if you went to the deeperbiblepodcast.com/give, that would really allow us to continue this work, which we believe God's called us to. So with that, be well, fall to the ground as though dead before Jesus once in a while. And as the ancient rabbis say, shalom, homies. Bye-bye.